All right, I think we're ready. Maybe we'll put those up. Put that there. So I have us at right uh, 1 minute late, 11 o'clock, and we will go ahead and get started. We're having a few different pieces today. I'll be telling the studio audience more in a moment, but there's a new video web streamer, a different web streamer we're using, probably just for this seminar, and then we'll go back to the traditional one next time. There were some scheduling issues with that. But anyway, welcome to our seminar today. We're very pleased to get going with it. It is on Bridging the West and East, and it's a seminar about Carl Jung and Richard Wilhelm, and we're very excited to have some true experts in the field today with that. My name is Steve Buser. I'm a psychiatrist and one of the co-founders of the Asheville Jung Center with my partner Len Cruz. And we have about 70 or so people that will be joining us in various levels today. We have 8 countries that are participating, and those include Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, Russia, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. And we are just very pleased for people to be able to tune in from really around the world. Very excited to have these programs going. Our organization is the Asheville Jung Center. We're at ashevilleyoungcenter.org. Do visit our website, although most of you probably already have. We've got a pretty broad selection now of DVDs, seminars. We have a blog, social media, transcripts, really a whole host of things we're trying to expand with that. A couple of announcements. One is make sure if you need professional continuing education that you sign up for that, both for today's program. You can get 5 CE credits, but also if you need other credits, we've got a pretty large library now of credits available, so take a look at that. We have 2 upcoming programming pieces I'd like to highlight. One is October 27th. This one will be the San Francisco Jung Institute. We'll be looking at the shadow side of U.S. politics at that point. Now, for those of you with a calendar, that's 1 week before the U.S. presidential election, so you can imagine why we picked that time. I think there'll be some interest around then. The next one I'd like to highlight is another one of our Zurich series, and that is November 29th. We'll be looking at the end of the world, really the archetype of the end of the world. And that date coincides 3 weeks prior to December 21st, 2012, which many of you know is the end of the world, and we decided to do it a few weeks beforehand just in case. Of course, that's the Mayan calendar, not really end date, but we'll talk more about that. But some people feel the world will end that day, but we're hoping it doesn't. A few quick thanks. Thank you, as always, to the University of North Carolina, Asheville, the Department of Psychology, and the Distance Learning Center. They are our host today here, as well as the NC Run facility in the Research Triangle Park out by Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you again to the ETH University, also known as the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. They are our Zurich host, where Murray, Sarah, and Bettina will be speaking from. And of course, this is a university where Carl Jung himself was a professor at, so we're delighted with the history of that. Thank you also to the International School of Analytical Psychology, ISAP Zurich. They have supported us from the very beginning by loaning us not only Murray Stein, but a whole host of top-notch analysts there, and we really appreciate their ongoing support in that way. We are required to announce that we have no commercial support for presenters, topics, or programs. There is no pharmaceutical industry support of any kind associated with us today. We will be sending out a survey later today to all people that have registered, and if you don't mind, take a few minutes to complete that. And if you registered for continuing education credits, you'll get a brief test that you can take, and that will link you to your certificate. A couple of housekeeping pieces. Remember, we're recording today's seminar, so if you're at a live site and don't wish your voice to be recorded, please write out any questions and hand them to a host. The web streamer is a little bit different, you'll notice, for the home viewers. Hopefully you've been able to sign on by now with that. If not, hopefully you'll know to email us that question. I'm sure you will. Any questions for our presenters will need to be emailed just for this seminar only, and send it to our normal email, which is info@ashevilleyoungcenter.org. And I'll announce that at the breaks as well, but just email us any questions for our presenters. Please turn off any cell phones if you're at a live site, or put them on vibrate. And this will be a 3-hour seminar with 1 break approximately halfway through. Let me tell you briefly about our presenters today, and then we'll turn it over to Zurich. Murray Stein, of course, is our anchor presenter and has been for some time. He is the past president of the International School of Analytical Psychology and now a senior training analyst there. He's also past president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology. He's a wonderful teacher, gifted author, and has published many really superb texts. Our next presenter is Bettina Wilhelm. She is the granddaughter of Richard Wilhelm, and we're very excited to have her here today. Most of you probably know that Richard Wilhelm translated both the I Ching, and I brought my copy of that today, also The Secret of the Golden Flower, which I left at my bedside table, so I don't have. But he is an amazing person, or was an amazing person, and we're so happy to have his granddaughter Bettina with us. She was born in Shanghai, China, and now lives in Basel as well as Berlin. She has a degree in film and TV from the Middlesex Polytechnic College in London. She is co-founder of Berlin Transform Theater and works there as a director, actress, and producer. And lastly, Sarah Liu will be joining us as well. Sarah is a psychotherapist in Taiwan. She has taught at the Tukung University Department of Psychology. She's the founder of Shu Li Memorial Foundation, which offers seminar and training in various psychotherapies in Taiwan. She is currently a candidate in the analytical training program at ISAP, Zurich, Switzerland. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Zurich. Thank you very much today. So to you, Murray.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Today I'm going to be a Charlie Rose. And at the table with me today are two very fine guests who you've already introduced and who will in turn make a presentation which I'm sure the audience will find fascinating and informative. And they are willing to take questions as we go through the seminar. My plan is to introduce the subject of Jung and Richard Wilhelm, Jung's interest in Chinese culture briefly, and then to turn the table over to Bettina, who will speak about her film and show a clip from her film about her grandfather, Richard Wilhelm. And then Sarah Liu will speak to us about the Secret of the Golden Flower, Jung's commentary on it, and other reflections about contemporary issues regarding Chinese society, culture, dual culture, right, that sort of thing, Sarah. So I think the audience will find all of that very interesting. We'll then have a break and come back, and then I'll continue with some reflections on why Jung was so interested in Richard Wilhelm's work, what it meant to him, and perhaps tie some of his interest in Wilhelm back to his Red Book experience and try to show a link, a deep link in his thinking between what he discovered in texts like the I Ching and Secret of the Golden Flower, and the reason it was so important to him and meaningful in his work in depth psychology. But let me begin by just saying a few words about Jung and Richard Wilhelm. The film that you can watch, if you haven't already watched, I strongly encourage you to watch Bettina Wilhelm's film about the life and work of Richard Wilhelm. And that will explain a lot about his life, his history, and what his work in China meant to him. Richard Wilhelm was a Protestant missionary to China from 1899 to 1920, basically lived for some 20 years in China, started his family there, started a school there, was very active in the missions, although he says, and Bettina quotes this very prominently in her film, that he didn't baptize a single Chinese during his 20 years of missionary work in China, of which he was very proud. Because his idea really was to relate to Chinese culture and not to try to impose a foreign culture on them, and try to learn from them and bring back to the West, something that he had gathered from his studies of traditional Chinese culture. Jung met him in the early 1920s, we think, at a meeting of the School of Wisdom in Darmstadt, Germany. Count von Kaiserling had set up this school. Many illustrious and well-known European intellectuals and cultural figures went there, gave lectures, met each other. And Jung and Wilhelm were both in residence there in the early 1920s, and that's probably where Jung first met Richard Wilhelm, got to know him. And I think their meeting was a very, very electrifying one for Jung, at least, and I'm sure for Richard Wilhelm too. I think they were soul brothers in a sense, and they recognized that almost immediately. And I'll just read a few lines from Jung's essay on Richard Wilhelm, In Memoriam, to put a little meat on the bones of what I've just said. The reason that they were so close to each other, I think, had to do with a temperamental similarity. I think they were thinking along very similar lines, and it was very unusual for Jung to find somebody else that he could actually relate to who was in tune with the way he saw the world and the way he thought. And I think Richard Wilhelm was one of those few individuals that he came upon in the course of his life that he really found deeply sympathetic and compatible. And so when they met, Jung invited Richard Wilhelm to come to Zurich and give some lectures at the Psychological Club, which had been founded in 1916 in Zurich, and Jung was very actively involved with, of course, throughout the rest of his life. And in his remarks in this memorial address, he says that Wilhelm came to the Psychological Club, doesn't give a date, we think somewhere in the early 1920s probably, and lectured about the I Ching. And Jung had been studying the I Ching in the Legge translation for a period of time before that. He was very interested in the text, but the Legge translation isn't anywhere near the masterful work that Richard Wilhelm produced. It gives the bare bones of the contents of the I Ching, but it doesn't give the heart and soul of it, which Richard Wilhelm managed to capture in his translation. And so he invited Wilhelm to come to Zurich. Wilhelm gave a lecture on the I Ching and gave a demonstration of the I Ching at the Psychological Club. And Jung says he threw an I Ching, they asked a question through the I Ching, and within 6 months, everything that he had predicted or that the I Ching had said came to pass. It was a magical moment at the Psychological Club. I'm sure it opened a lot of people's eyes to the amazing ability of this ancient oracle to foretell the future. It was a kind of oracle for the Chinese in ancient times that they would consult about the future. And now Wilhelm was bringing it into Western culture, and Jung was very interested, and Jung started using the I Ching in his own life, asking the I Ching questions and actually using it with patients occasionally. And I'll try to tell you later why he felt that was so important to start thinking in a different way about causality. He then made a very important contact with Wilhelm in the late 1920s. Wilhelm went back to China for a couple of years in the mid-20s, came back finally and definitively back to Germany, where he became an academic in the university in Frankfurt, I think it was, Frankfurt. And then Jung began to visit him occasionally, passing through Frankfurt, came through on the train, would stop off, visit with Wilhelm. And at one point, Richard Wilhelm asked him to write a commentary on this ancient Chinese text that he was translating called The Secret of the Golden Flower. And both Bettina, Wilhelm, and Sarah Lou will pick that up in their comments, so I'm not going to say too much about that. But that was a very, very important moment in Jung's own development, his own thinking about his own individuation process and the archetypal foundations of individuation. And so it came to pass that this moment of arrival on his doorstep of this Chinese text opened a whole new direction for his own thinking and study. It really led into his very intensive study of alchemy that began in the early 1930s. So Richard Wilhelm really is a pivotal figure in Jung's life. And then Jung invited Wilhelm to speak at a meeting of German-speaking psychotherapists that was being held in 1930. And he had a very specific reason for inviting Wilhelm to speak to this group of psychotherapists. But unfortunately, 2 months or so before the Congress was to be held at Bad Nauheim in Germany, Richard Wilhelm died. And he died a rather early death in his late 50s, I think it was.
56.
56 years old. Bettina will say something about that in her comments. And this was a terrible blow, I think, to Jung, to lose a man that he had just so recently discovered and who seemed to be on the verge of a great friendship and collaboration. Jung was then invited to make the major address at a memorial service for Richard Wilhelm in May, I think, in Munich in May of 1930. And that address is published in volume 15 of the collected works. I just want to read a couple of sentences from that to give you an idea of the importance that Wilhelm had for Jung and why he thought Wilhelm's work was so extraordinary. He opens his address, and I'm sure it was a very emotional moment in his life to be present at this memorial service and to address the people there. And he says, "It is no easy task for me to speak of Richard Wilhelm and his work, because starting far away from one another, our paths crossed in comet-like fashion." Very poetic way of speaking of their meeting. And this passing of the comets didn't last very long, some 8 years or so. But starting far away, Jung was referring to China. Wilhelm came back from China after his missionary work. Jung was here in Europe, and they had this extraordinary meeting of souls and minds. And he says, his life work has a range that lies outside my compass. I've never seen the China that first molded his thought and later continued to engross him, and so on. So he comes from far away culturally, but Jung goes on and says, Wilhelm possessed the kind of mastery which is won only by a man who goes beyond his specialty. And so his striving for knowledge became a concern touching all of mankind. As a rule, the specialist's is a purely masculine mind, Jung says. As a rule, the specialist's mind is a purely masculine mind, an intellect in which fecundity is an alien and unnatural process. In other words, it's not a fertile mind. It doesn't have a womb. It is therefore an especially ill-adapted tool for giving rebirth to a foreign spirit. What he's talking about is the scholar's mind, an analytic mind, a mind that dissects texts, takes them apart, analyzes the words, vocabulary, puts it back together in some fashion, but doesn't give birth to anything new. But a larger mind, he says, but a larger mind bears the stamp of the feminine. It is endowed with a receptive and fruitful womb, which can reshape what is strange and give it a familiar form. Wilhelm possessed the rare gift of a maternal intellect. To it he owed his unequaled ability to feel his way into the spirit of the East and to make his incomparable translations. So what Jung is saying is that Wilhelm could take the spirit of the East into himself in these texts, working with the scholars there, take it into his mind and incubate it and produce something that was quite new, not a simple translation, but a new thing, a new being that could then be brought into the West, where people of the West would recognize it because it had Western genes in it. This is a combination of a Western intellect, a maternal intellect, picking up the spirit of the East, being inspired by the animus of the East, taking it into the anima of the West, and bringing forth a child, the I Ching, the translation of the I Ching. So this new thing that Wilhelm produced, Jung looked upon as the product of a particular kind of mind. Now this kind of mind, the maternal mind, is something that Jung also had. I think Jung went back and forth between a masculine mind, an analytic mind, scientific mind, Western trained science, and a maternal mind, which is a deeply reflective, slow-moving, incubating, creative mind that produces something new. And Jung's criticism of the universities in the West was that they were great with the masculine mind, at analyzing and cutting things apart, but they weren't very good at producing new cultural forms or a new direction for culture. They're not very creative. They're analytic, but they're not creative. Wilhelm was a different breed. And this, I think when he met Wilhelm, he confronted a mind much like his own, this maternal mind that he had developed, Jung himself had developed in the course of his Red Book experience, where he works very hard to develop his ego as a womb, he says in several places. His ego has to become a womb for the unconscious, spirit of the unconscious to enter, to fertilize, and give birth to new creative thoughts and products. So I think that meeting of minds with Wilhelm was on this level, that he recognized in Wilhelm temperamental similarity. They probably were both introverted, intuitive thinking types, if you want to put it typologically. The masculine mind is typically extroverted, sensate thinking, scientific, analytic, and so on. Then he goes on to say, to me, the greatest of his achievements is his translation of and commentary on the I Ching. So Wilhelm translated a lot of texts from the Chinese, Lao Tzu and Confucius and all the, many of the great classics. But Jung felt that the greatest achievement was the translation of the I Ching. And that's what he really fixed on. And Jung felt very strongly that the I Ching should also be translated into English. Wilhelm translated it into German. Jung had a close colleague who had worked with him also on trying to put the text of the Red Book together into a publishable form, actually. Carrie Baines was her name. And she worked with the text of the Red Book with Jung for a number of years, and she was an excellent translator. He asked her to turn her attention to the I Ching. It took her about 20 years to produce an English translation of the I Ching. It was published around 1950, and Jung wrote a foreword to it. And it became, in the course of time, especially after the 1960s, a famous worldwide bestseller. And so it was through this channel, from this comet-like meeting, Wilhelm coming from China, meeting Jung, and Jung helping that book, the I Ching, into the global conversation that's going on in the world today, that made the I Ching available to all of us, and is widely used by Jungians, and by people who just have an interest in synchronicity or ancient philosophy. It's a wonderful book just to open up and read a few pages. And it is this combination, and it's been criticized for that Wilhelm put himself into it. But he didn't put himself into it as an alien force. He put himself into it as a mother puts herself into a child. So what we have in the translation of the I Ching is Wilhelm and the Chinese text, a kind of conglomerate or a kind of hybrid that makes it so accessible to us. And a good friend of mine, John Beebe, who was born in China and studied the I Ching for many, many years and has all the translations of the I Ching, there are many of them, told me he always comes back to the Wilhelm translation because it's more than just a translation. It's a gift from, say, from Richard Wilhelm and the best of European culture, taking this text into itself and producing this wonderful new product. So I'm going to say some more about why Jung was fascinated by the I Ching and Chinese culture after the break. This is an introduction to Jung and Richard Wilhelm, and I will now ask Bettina, Richard Wilhelm's granddaughter, and she'll tell you something about herself and her life, to speak to you about the film that she made. It took her, 7 years to make this film? And it's also a gestation. It's a long period of time to work on a subject, but she has done such a masterful job with this film that I really think communicates the spirit of Richard Wilhelm in the film and the meaning that China and Chinese culture had for Richard Wilhelm. So I urge you all, if you haven't already done so, to watch the film. So Bettina, please.
Thank you. Well, when I started the film, I was no expert whatsoever. I did not know much about China. I knew a little bit about the I Ching, but not in depth. And I hardly knew anything about my grandfather, Richard Wilhelm, who died more than 20 years before I was born. So the books were there in our house, but during all my young life, I thought, well, what does it have to do with my life? And I couldn't really connect to it. And then, maybe thanks to a crisis and getting older, I got really interested. I got interested to understand more of not only the I Ching, but more about life, and found out that there was a member of my family who had asked the big questions of life. And this was, I felt, his motor. Even before he went out to China, he said, I want to know why everything is as it is. So with a very open mind, and he wanted to get out of any narrow thinking countries, and so he came there with his curiosity. And he always was a person who was not conventional. I mean, he was, by then, he finished his studies in theology. He was a vicar, he was a pastor. But he never really related to the conventional church, not even the Protestant one. But he had a deep belief in him from the very beginning, just always tried to find his own ways. And when he came to China and learned Chinese and encountered the Chinese thinking, I had the feeling it felt familiar to him. Because it was asking questions and coming back to very basic and near simple might be the wrong word, but like a child would ask a question and come to answers by really looking at things. I mean, this is also in a way like an early scientific mind. You don't come from the theories, your basis is looking at nature, and from there getting the theories. And since what he learned about Chinese philosophy is in this way and was to him accessible, that's why he connected to it so much and felt a deep wisdom, which only, well, the simpler it gets, the wiser it gets at some point. He felt that deep wisdom was underlying that all, and that's what I think was what he tried to trace with translations, and he enjoyed life there and the people. I mean, I think he really enjoyed his life in China. And then later, there were quite a lot of turmoils with Boxer Rebellion, with the Chinese Revolution of 1911, when Sun Yat-sen took the power from the monarchy, from the imperial dynasties. He stayed open, and then he met a Chinese sage named Lao Naishen, maybe I pronounce him wrong, who had to flee because he was in the government, but he was a great sage, and he encouraged him to translate the I Ching. So I don't think he ever would have dared and tried to do this on his own. But because he had a mediator and he explained it to him, and they worked back and forth and back and forth, so he then came slowly to understand the meaning of these images. And as we all know, it's a language of images, and images can have manifold interpretations. And without the help of somebody who grew up in that tradition, and I think he even was in that big oral tradition of the I Ching, he came to an understanding of these images, which enabled him to translate the way he did, and it was a work of 11 years. So, well, there was this big person in the family, and I didn't know him. And so, since I'm a filmmaker by profession, this was my way to try to learn to know him. And it took me quite some time until I got a feeling, what kind of person was he? And then I found in the archives in Munich, where most of his whatever he has ever written is in a archive of the Bavarian Academy of Sciences. His childhood memories, he reconstructed them when he was for a second time in China, in Beijing. And there, and it's always when you understand how somebody started off with all the conflicts and all the longings and all the, then I got a feeling why he was so fascinating. And that was for me very, very important. I think otherwise I would not have been able to make that film, or a bad one. So, and then this film was a big journey over many years, writing, rewriting, learning, not knowing how to ever get all that information into 90 minutes. So wonderful people to help me with, a brilliant cameraman and editor. We worked for a long time, and so we all went onto that journey. It was very important for me to have really great professionals at my side, Peter Indergant, the cameraman, and Ashad Lalim, the editor, so that I could not just say, well, you know, it was that in my family, so they, yes, and what do you want to tell in the scene? So they really kept up the professional level, and I'm incredibly thankful. And then a composer came who found the music for this film. I mean, I was very, very lucky during this process, even though it took long and was sometimes painful. But it was a big journey, and this big journey, big adventure, and I never profited from everything in my life as much as from that.
And visiting China.
And visiting China, yes. Being born there, not knowing much of it. It was fascinating. Of course, I couldn't enter the country as my grandfather did, for the simple reason that I don't speak Chinese. I only have a few words and work with translators, but well, I got a glimpse, and hopefully we'll later look more into that.
And what did you find in Qingdao? You went there, where he lived.
I was astonished, because before I was looking in Germany, tried to find a place where he was born and lived, and everything was destroyed by the Second World War. Not a hint where everything was. And then I came to Qingdao, and it was very easy to find the school which he founded and the house where he lived. They were there, they were existing. There was a nameplate for Richard Wilhelm was in front of that school. And the school has two names. Sort of one name is the middle school number 9, but it still has also Wei Lichen, the name of Richard Wilhelm's Chinese name. So very much alive, and in this German architecture in China. I mean, this was quite weird. Yes, fascinating. Fascinating. I mean, how the upheavals in China, and also with what China is now, and this tradition. I mean, it's parallel in some ways, and I found this extremely fascinating. Very rich country.
Now you wanted to play us a piece of the film.
Well, yes. This is a piece of film which is concentrating on Richard Wilhelm and C.G. Jung. C.G. Jung.
There is but one.
Not
Sorry.
yet.
Not yet.
I just would like to introduce it a little bit. So, my editor said at one point, so, and what do we have about Richard Wilhelm and C.G. Jung? And I said, well, there's a photograph of Richard Wilhelm and maybe a photograph of Richard Jung where we can get the rights for. And what else? And I said, well, there's that house of C.G. Jung in Zurich where Richard Wilhelm visited him. And that for the first time in that film, this editor said, no, we can't do that. So, and then I heard about the Red Book, which was about to be published, and got a contact to Sono Shandasani, who published it, and now try to find the go button.
There is but one truth throughout the world. The time has come that the great teachings of the East and West must stop being the special domain of a single country.
The inexhaustible search for the sources of deeper insight tightens the friendship between my grandfather and C.G. Jung. In London, I met Professor Sonu Shamdasani. For decades, he has studied Jung's work and published books on him. Now he has succeeded in creating a sensation. Thanks to long years of work and persuasion, he has launched a document which was kept secret for many years. The Red Book. Here, Jung documents his innermost visions. He writes and paints whatever bursts out from his deepest unconscious.
He was the book of his soul. This painting is unfinished.
It is such an intimate document that Jung had doubts about publishing it during his lifetime.
That's beautiful.
I learned that one of the mandalas in this book has great significance for his relationship with my grandfather. Whilst Jung is painting it, he receives an ancient Taoist text from him. The Secret of the Golden Flower.
Wilhelm sends it to him, asking him to write a commentary.
Yeah.
It's not just,
Yeah.
is this here's something I found you might be interested in. It's, he explicitly invites his collaboration on this text. Jung abruptly stopped the transcription of the text of Liber Novus into the calligraphic volume and decided to leave it to one side. But what struck him was the parallel between the mandala he was painting at that time, which he felt had a Chinese character, and some of the conceptions in The Secret of the Golden Flower. It gave him a confirmation of his ideas, that there were other people elsewhere engaged in similar practices, coming up with similar conceptions. He could relate to something outside of himself. I think Jung himself makes some comments on this, which...
In the epilogue of the Red Book, Jung writes,
you read in The Golden Flower, the book
I have worked on this book for 16 years. The beginning of the end came in 1928, when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower. Here the contents of my book had found their way into reality, and I could no longer go on working on it.
In a letter that Sergei Jung wrote to Richard Wilhelm, he said, fate has made of us two bridges to link the East and the West. So they had a conception of a shared destiny. That's what drew them together.
It is no accident that I, coming from China, found in Dr. Jung a European with whom I have much in common. Independently of each other, Chinese wisdom, as well as the insights of Dr. Jung, have descended into the depth of the human collective consciousness, where they have encountered entities that look so similar to each other because they both truly exist. This seems to prove that truth can be reached from every point of view, if only one digs deep enough.
Jung writes the introduction to Richard Wilhelm's translation of The Secret of the Golden Flower. The book is about the immortal inner essence, the golden flower, which can only be developed by special meditation techniques. One of the mandalas Jung shows in his foreword without mentioning his name is the Golden Castle.
In the book of the Yellow Castle, it says, "In the inch-wide field of the foot-wide house, life can be ordered. What else could it be but the heavenly heart? The Confucians call it the center of emptiness. The Buddhists call it the terrace of liveliness. The Taoists, the land of the ancestors, or Yellow Castle."
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tina. We really appreciate that. One thing I want to add that I meant to say earlier is this is the DVD of the film that's coming out. And for any of the people that are watching today that have registered, you can also register to watch the film for another 10 days. We'll have it on our site for at the end of this month. but in December, Amazon US, the United States version of Amazon, will be selling this, so December sometime. Meanwhile, it is out in Europe, but it truly is an excellent film if you get a chance to do so. So back to Zurich. Do you want to break for questions, or do you want to keep going there, Murray?
We'll keep going for a bit, okay? I want to segue
Yes,
now. We'll come back to Bettina later, but we're going to segue into The Secret of the Golden Flower. And Sarah Liu is going to give us some interesting reflections and information about Jung and Jung's work on that text and the text itself, the Chinese text. But let me just say a few words about Sarah before we begin. You want to move over here? China has come online in the Jungian world quite strongly in the last 15 years, and with increasing numbers and strength as time goes on. In 1994, Tom Kirsch and I, Tom was the president of the IAP and I was his honorary secretary, made the first official IAP visit to China at the invitation of Professor Heiyong Shen in Guangzhou. And at that time, there were no Jungian analysts, there was no Jungian presence in China. And Heiyong Shen has since then become trained as a Jungian analyst and has been a very important figure for Jungians in launching Jungian presence in China. So quite a few books have been translated into Chinese now on the mainland. And there are 3 or 4 developing groups, one in Shanghai, one in Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and now Macau. And a few years ago, when was it that Tom first came to Taiwan?
2009.
In 2009, Tom Kirsch was invited to Taipei, Taiwan, by the Changs, Jenny and Steve Chang, and Sarah Liu, who was in Taiwan at that time. They met Tom in San Francisco, invited him, and he came there with his wife Jean, and they began teaching and lecturing, and eventually set up a IAP developing group in Taiwan, which is now very strong, very active. And we now have several students at ISAP from Taiwan who will be going back there as analysts, trained at ISAP, and going back to Taipei, and will become the core of a future Jungian Institute there. And someday, I'm sure, set up a training program. In our audience, we have another Taiwanese student, Josephine. And so Sarah is a leader in Taiwan. She's been a teacher there for many years, teacher of psychotherapy. She's now training as a Jungian analyst and will return in a couple of years, I guess, to take up a practice in Taiwan. Now, she's done quite a bit of research on The Secret of the Golden Flower, the text, Jung's commentary on it, and I think a paper was circulated so that the members of the seminar have access to some of her work. And another paper will be published next year in a book that Jean Kirsch is editing, Why We Still Read Jung and How. So she's a very productive member of our community, and she's going to favor us now with some comments on the secret of the golden flower. Sarah?
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I
Just
will
speak up
basically.
so they all can hear you.
Okay. I will read from my papers. I will share my journey through reading Jung's commentary of The Secret of Golden Flower. Going back and forth between Jung's commentary and the original Taoist text, I experienced a different thinking process. Confused, I argue and dialogue with Jung's commentary. During this process, one interesting question arose. How can Jung help us, as non-Westerners, to engage with our old traditions in order to nourish our soul in this modern world? I will use some of. This presentation will include 3 parts. First, historical background of the Secret of the Golden Flower, which means the Chinese modernity. The second part will be the Taoist ontologist and the main concept of the book of the Secret of Golden Flower. The third, Jung's symbolic reading of Hui, a Chinese character, return. The first part, I want to say it. During the first half of the 20th century, China went through a radical process of modernization. Western educated Chinese intellectuals believe that no matter how glorious Chinese culture was before, the outdated culture needed to be replaced by a new Western and modern one. They believed the collective psyche was still locked in a primitive and mysterious mindset, eliminating the superstitious and mysterious part of the culture called for a rational and critical attitude towards tradition on every level. The book of the Secret of the Golden Flower was one of those outdated texts that should be thrown away. It was during 1920s, time of turmoil and confusion, that the Secret of the Golden Flowers was first translated. In 1928, Jung received the German translation of this book from Wilhelm and wrote a long commentary for it. Jung described his core concern at the time when he received the Secret of Golden Flower. He said, "I had been seeking, striving for, thinking, and doing in my effort to alleviate the psychic sufferings of Europeans. Interestingly, at the same time, and with similar concerns of elevating the psychic suffering caused by the past, Chinese intellectuals took a different path, throwing away and eliminating the influence of those same traditional texts, which Jung prized so high. In 1922, when the voice of cultural revolution, it's not cultural revolution, it's called cultural reform, reached its height in China, Wilhelm was teaching at the Beijing University, the center of new cultural movement. I imagined that when Wilhelm working hard translate I Ching, Western educated Chinese intellectuals and youth marched just outside his small red brick building, vowing to destroy those old texts, which they believe kept the Chinese people in ignorance and mysticism. The very texts and concepts that Wilhelm was trying to introduce to European society were believed by Chinese mainstream scholars to be the enemy of Chinese modernity. Jung, in his memoriam of Wilhelm, said, "His grateful reverence of his mind, which create a bridge between East and West, and giving the Occidents the heirship to a precious culture thousands of years old." I want to emphasize the sentence after. A culture perhaps destined to disappear. But an important question to ponder is why the 1,000 years old treasure would lose its value in the eyes of the Chinese. It is neither for Jung or Wilhelm to answer. Jung was like a treasure hunter who found the old treaties worth of preservation. But the Chinese want to destroy them as thoroughly as they could. The crossover of cultural position between Wilhelm, Jung, and the Chinese intellectuals at the beginning of the 20th century speaks loudly to us about the importance of each culture's different paths of individuation. It appears that At the time, the golden flower was transplanted to the West because its native homeland had rejected to nourish it. Now I want to say the second part of my talk. It's about the book. With regard to the huge collection of Chinese Taoist literature, the book has no unique status in Taoist tradition. In terms of its content, it teaches nothing new. If not for Wilhelm's translation and Jung's commentary, this book may have been buried under huge piles of similar books and been forgotten by Chinese scholars and Taoist practitioners long ago. The book was said to come from the teaching of Lu Dongbing, who is believed to be the founder of Taoist in the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century. The actual date and the authorship of this book is unknown. The content of this book originally was oral teaching in a small circle of certain Taoist practitioners belonging to Northern School of Taoism, and the teaching was written down in the middle of 17th centuries, possibly a handwriting from circulation among a very small group of Taoists. The version Wilhelm translated was published in 1911. This year popped up again and again. Interestingly, or synchronistically, 1911 is the year the 1,000-year-old dynasty became the modern republic. The Secret of Golden Flower is a simple, small Taoist book teaching Taoist meditation so its practitioner can reach enlightenment. It starts with an explanation of Taoist ontology and establishes the fundamental reason for bodily practice to reach spiritual wholeness. Then it progressed into teaching a method of meditation in great detail, include ways and place to concentrate, as well as breathing technique. The text describes problems and dangers that practitioners may encounter during their practice and suggest ways to avoid those pitfalls. After describing the meditation technique using image, the text guides practitioners through the different stages of bodily experience and spiritual development. By quieting the mind, sitting still, focusing inwardly, and controlling their breathing, Taoist practitioners believe they are able to hear inner sound and see the inner image. Step by step, practitioners can trace back to the beginning of life as an embryo, and even beyond that, to the beginning of life. The final stage is to reach the nothingness of the universe, which is symbolized in the text as golden light and a golden flower. So we need to say a little bit about the Taoist ontology. We need to go back to Chinese Taoist ontology, which starts from the source of the universe. According to Taoist ontology, the nature of the universe is nothingness, called Wuji. And from nothingness, Taiji come out. Taiji has two separate and opposite forces, yin and yang. From Taiji, the 5 elements, gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, are developed. And through the 5 elements, heaven and earth are created. In between heaven and earth, the world of all living beings are created. The life energy flows out from nothingness and creates and moves the world and the human being. Therefore, all sentient beings are a micro-universe, functioning according to the principle of yin and yang, Tai Chi, and the 5 elements. I want to talk about a little bit the main concept about the book. First is about return to the light. The main concept of the Secret of Golden Flower is to teach people to recognize the need and the method for reverse the flow of life energy. The life libido, which naturally flows outwardly, need to be guided inward to bring life back to the source of the universe. Only through reversing the natural way can the universal wisdom be received, and the personal life be prolonged or even become immortal. Therefore, the core method of the golden flower is represented by the Chinese character Hui, means return. The first chapter of the text states that the method for finding the true self depends entirely on the backward or floating movement. The strong emphasis on the inward and the return concept is related with the center, which reflects Taoist spiritual concern for preserving human life. According to Taoists, the nature way of life, completely attached to the external world, exhausts one's energy and brings sickness, aging, and death. This can be avoided if people practice the meditation of reverting life energy. So let me use the PowerPoint to say it very quick about the book. So now we can see it's thinking about what is golden flower. Golden flower is the symbol of light, of the universe, universal essence. What is the secret? The book teaches how to return to the life of origin, the light of universe. So golden flower is a light, heavenly light, or Tao, in Chinese way of saying universal wisdom, and also from Jung's term, mandala, self. What is golden flower? Golden flower is, I bring up this image. It looks like a Chinese painting and a lot of writing. It looks like a landscape, but actually it's not. This is a painting from 17th century. It's a body map. It's talking about Taoist concept about the inner world of the human being. We mentioned about Taoist ontology before, about from Wuji to Taiji to Yin and Yang to 5 elements, heaven and earth, then come into all the living beings. In here, Chinese also believe duality, but this duality is we call soft duality. The two opposite parts are not really conflict each other, rather interact, and they are part of each other. I didn't bring up the image, but I think most of people know the Tai Chi, half white, half black, and each color have it. The white part have black dot, and the black part have a white dot. It's saying about this concept, soft duality. And also this book mentioned about this two world view. It's about there's two world of origin and the world of consciousness. This is the same painting, redone in the color. Now people can see it much clearer. You have a two circle. One is of the body, and then upper circle, it's more about representing the world of origin. And you can see the line, it's actually spine, talking about from the bottom of the energy and then goes up, follows the road to the mountain, and then comes back. Let me talk about the world of origin. The original source never moves, according to the book. It has no form and no existence. There is no life and no death there. So it is nothingness. Therefore, so we return to the origin of the universe means return to the nothingness. It also means returning to a place beyond life and death, beyond time and space, beyond person, personal body and mind. There is the other world, the world we are living, the world of consciousness. The natural libido flow is consistently moving outwardly, which is a repeated cycle of creating, growing, maturing, declining, and death. So what we are doing, what Taoist is trying to teach, is how to return the world of origin. So return to the light means return to that world. Return to the light of the original world and return to the circulation of light. This is the goal. Return in Chinese is this word, the very earliest, very ancient word. This I will come back to talk about. This is called Hui. The way of return is teaching here is Taoist meditation. The simple path of return is sitting and breathing. That's simple. Through eyes and ears, we see the inner light and hear the inner sound. The very first step is we focusing in heaven, heavenly consciousness. This is the translation by Wilhelm. Other translation will use celestial mind. Actually, it's a place is in between two eyes and inner. From that point, go in our head. Then we half close our eyes, focus our eyesight on the tip of our nose, then let go of the eyesight and bring our focus on the spot between our two eyes and the inner space of our head. Turn the seeing from external to internal world. Then we move to second step. We start to adjust one's breathing. This breath in the book using specific words called xi is breathe or breathing. These words use two parts. One is called self on the top and then heart on the bottom. So breathe is self and mind together. So it's describing the mind and the breathing is correlated with each other. And this breath, this xi, is specific breath. It's not the ordinary breathing. Because this breathing is describing the embryo still in the mother's womb. So we didn't use lung yet. Our breath is connected through our mother's blood to breathe. So that is Taoist breath was really looking for. It's imagine we go into that state of mind, become an embryo again, and then connect with the universe as a mother's womb, just like Murray mentioned. So the breath became connected, breathing through the nothingness, through the universe. It's really not about nose or our lung. Hearing, also translated the illumination of the ear, using hearing to adjust our breathing from heavy to light until there is no sound to be heard. Then in the moment we can hear the sound of no sound. It means we reach the real breathing, the embryo breathing. Now is another important concept in the book is Hun and Po. Hun was now talking about Po. Po is control. Po translates as a bodily sensation. Hun it's spiritual awareness. And the whole book is trying to do the control bodily sensation, develop spiritual awareness. Controlling Po is the central work of Taoist meditation. It is to control thinking and sensory excitements. And by doing so, we are able to decrease the overly powerful Po and give the power back to Hun, is the spiritual awareness. How can we know we are in the right path? There are 3 signs teach in the book. Tell us if we are in the right path. First, we will hear, listening. We can hear, but when we are hearing, there is not I am listening. It's somebody. It's not me, but I'm listening, but not me. So the sound coming to my ear will like an echo in a valley. So we call the spirit in the valley. Second sign is seeing. You will see the room is full of white light, and our body cannot be seen even we open our eyes. So we call that the in an empty chamber, light grows. The third sign, the warm bodily sensation and the feeling of the ascendance, like you feel you cannot sit still anymore. The spirit return and touch heaven. That's what they describe it, this phenomenon. That is the positive sign, say you are doing the right things. But there is 3 warning. First,
Warning, not warming.
Warning, not warming. Sorry, wrong typing. Warning, negative. Don't idle sitting. It goes nowhere. Even you sitting monthly, years, if you just idle, there's nothing. Second, don't follow those endless thoughts. Because those thoughts may bring you to fantastic world, we may be caught by the animal spirits world. And the book specifically point out the fox world.
Fox.
Yeah, fox world. You be
Dangerous.
Yes. The third is don't stagnate in nothingness, a lifeless stage. It's like stop thinking and then sit. Feel like the person already fall into a very fixation stage. You say that's dangerous. We may fall into a world, it's rock and wood. The books have a very beautiful way of saying it. Death of the mind is the beginning of life of the spirit. So that is we are looking for. The image actually we saw from Patrick's film. From now on I'm showing the image from the books of The Secret of the Golden Flower. This is the meditation first stage. You just sit. The second stage, you can see there is inside the person have actually it's a baby. It's like you start pregnant. It's embryo start coming out inside the body. Actually, it's not necessarily a child form. It could be a light, or it could be a flower. It could be something shining. It's starting to develop, and you sit there just like you are prepare the child to grow inside of you. Every day you bring a little bit bigger of this inner awareness. And this third stage is the baby mature and come out. But this coming out from the head, it's coming out from there. It's the baby, the true you coming out from the head. So the fourth stage is that world of you meditate and you went into the world of the origin. It's such a rich and it's all the goddess is there, or god or goddess is there. It's very rich. Actually, The Secret of a Golden Flower, this book has 2 books, 2 parts, 2 texts. The other one is called Chinese Book of Life, 慧命经. And they have 8 pictures, much clearer to describe this meditation teaching. First is this. It's talking about the imagine when you are meditating, your whole body is an alchemical vessel. So most important is not to let it broken. So the breeze is to go through unstopped. The conscious bring the breathing circling in the body like you are doing internal alchemical work. The second is talking about the circulation. It's guided you when you breathe out, breathe in, how fast, how slow, and which direction you should go. And now this is put into the body. Actually, it's breathe from the bottom of your torso and then follow from spine to the head and then go to the mouth, nose, and go down. And this is the stage. It's similar like the picture we saw before. Is there slowly after this kind of breeze, day by day, and then there is an inner awareness develop, like the child inside of you. And now the child matured after long sitting, maybe 100 days, maybe 1, 2, 3 years, and there's something coming out from you. So now you know it's not this physical body is real you. The real you is the one coming out from the meditation. And then that world start to develop more and more. To this stage, the person sitting there meditate. From outside, people seeing nothing happen, nothing change. But actually, there's lots happening inside. And you have a lot of awareness and wisdom coming. But people couldn't tell. In the end, there is emptiness. Nothing changed. Nothing come, nothing go. Nothing live, nothing die. Okay. This is the simple way of talking about the golden flower. Now I want to move into the third part of the talk. It's about Jung's way of reading The Secret of Golden Flower. Unlike most modern Chinese and Western readers who gave up to reading the old texts because of their unacceptable metaphysical concept, Jung was able to penetrate the old symbol system to bring a new meaning. Jung's way of reading The Secret of Golden Flowers can be described in two parts. First, he read the metaphysical and spiritual content symbolically. Second, he bring a psychological interpretation to those symbols. Jung explains his approach in this way. To understand metaphysically is impossible. It can only be done psychologically. I therefore strip things of their metaphysical wrapping in order to make them objects of psychology. In this way, I can at least get something comprehensible out of them and can avail myself of it. Moreover, I learn psychological conditions and the process which before were veiled in symbols and out of reach of my understanding. What Jung offers is not totally agreeable by many people because his psychological approach toward Chinese spiritual texts, in many sinologists' eye, is misreading and misunderstanding. Not knowing Chinese language and not being familiar with Taoism, Jung's misunderstanding of the text is almost unavoidable. Not to mention, his German version is from Wilhelm's translation, which also has Wilhelm's personal interpretation. Moving beyond sinology territory, I found Jung's ability to misread and misunderstanding the old text brought me a very exciting new understanding and avenue for Taoist study. Jung's psychological and symbolic approach can be seen as a new tool to reach old wisdom. I want to use Jung's reading of Chinese character Hui to discuss how we can learn from Jung's symbolic reading and develop our own way of reading. Chinese character are symbols. Chinese character, because of its special nature, can be treated as symbol and allow our mind to expand from cognitive thinking into intuitive imagination. The earliest Chinese writing, oracle bone inscription, used in the late Shang dynasty, is 12 centuries before Christ, were animal bone with inscribed question that were used as divinatory tools when burned in ceremonies to communicate with the spirits. Through reading the cracks on burning turtle shell and ox bone, divine messages were received, and ancient characters were used to record the divine message on the bones. Therefore, oracle bone characters with their pictorial nature are not just signs, but also symbols representing divine message from the Chinese collective unconsciousness. This is this is cow bone. This one is turtle shell. This is all from 12th century BC. So now I want to use as a symbol this one, Hui. This is a oracle bone. Hui is Chinese. In Chinese can have many different meaning, but the two most common used are is to return, to go back, which emphasize reverse motion, and the second meaning is to wind, to circle, to rotate, which emphasize the continuing circulation of the movement. Interestingly, Wilhelm and Thomas Clearly, they both translate The Secret of Golden Flower. Each choose different meaning. Each one of them choose one of it. For Hui, in their translation of the golden flowers, Wilhelm chose circulation, and Jung follows this concept, bring the mandala into his reading and elaborate beautifully in his commentary. And yeah, I also put, this is one he put in the book of the golden of secret flower. This is his mandala, and this is another one. And Thomas Cleary chose return and reverse, representing the regression movement of the life flow. If we trace the ancient form of Hui, its earliest representation was found in oracle bone script. Later, this pictographic character changed little in the form. It appeared as two circles, representing swords of water. It is the original meaning of circulation. Hui, from the image of swirling river or pond, indicates a circulating motion, and that motion continues. The character is also related to water and cloud, which give it the meaning of eternity. The Hui character is not only a word with the corresponding meaning, but also one of the most common carving patterns used in the ancient decoration for crockery. Sorry. This is also from Shang dynasty. You can see the Hui, this watery form. It's all Hui. From Hui, strong connection with the water image, we can read its symbolic meaning related with human unconsciousness. No matter how far we go, to return to the source of life, the self, and the golden flower, we need to follow the water way. the path of the unconscious to reach its eternal truth. In the latest study of oracle bone, I want to add this. It's actually in the book of The Secret of Golden Flower, giving the third meaning of Hui. And he put, the book says Hui is also means stop. So return to the light. It's Hui Guang in Chinese. Hui means stop, Guang means light. But the light here was explained as awareness. So it's like in order to get to the place you want to go, you have to first stop. Stop whatever attracts you and spend all the energy you are in. You have to stop. And then you start to aware what's happening inside. So I found that this really resonated with our work, analytic work. Hui has also another very new meaning. It's called echo. In the latest study of oracle bone, I keep saying it's too long, so I was thinking.
No, go ahead.
Okay. In this latest study of oracle bone's script, Chinese researcher Tsinghua identified one character that was later included in one of the multiple meanings of Hui. This character was created to emphasize the circulation of sun, not water. This form of Hui can be directly translated into English means echo. This pictographic character is a combination of a cliff on the left part and the ears on the right part. The picture represents a person standing in front of a high rocky cliff, listening. In The Secret of the Golden Flower, the importance of healing is mentioned. So the function of the ear is not to hear the sound from outside, rather it's used to hear the sound from inside. The text called this kind of hearing is the light of the ear. In meditation, practitioners are trained to do attentive hearing in order to regulate their breathing. But concentrating on their hearing, practitioner can reach the level of the no breathing sound, which regards as the highest level of hearing. By listening to the inner no sound, the highest goal of hearing is reached, which is the meaning of the illuminate of the ear. In the symbol for Hui, I found the translation of echo especially meaningful. My experience of studying this Taoist text has corresponded with what this character represents. I was like that primordial man who stood in front of the high cliff, listening attentively. He extended his ears and tried to determine the source of the sound. It might be from something behind or around him, or from inside of him. The word echo symbolized my experience of reading Jung's reflection of The Secret of Golden Flowers. The huge echo soared through space and time across thousands of miles and years. In between modern Chinese reality and Jungian depth psychology, I suddenly stood in the same position as my ancestor in 1400 BC. When this verse was created, I extended my ears to hear the sound echoing from the high cliff of Jung's writing. Where is the source of the sound? It is from me, or from my ancestor, whom I left behind for a long time, in order to find my own way of being in the modern world. Now, I hear the echo, so I turn my hearing inward, trying to hear the sound of no sound, the sound from remote antiquity, hailing from my ancestor spirit. Reading Jung's shed light on the old text and has brought me to new ways of understanding. He drew nuance from the old texts, making them personally relevant, between completely westernized and traditional mentality. Jung demonstrated a modern, individualized, personal, and psychological way to understand the old knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Beautiful, beautiful paper. Should we take a few minutes for questions before the break, Steve? What do you think?
Why don't we do the break first, and I'll start correlating, pulling together some of the email questions that have come in, and I'll give people time to think as well. I think we're right at the 12:30 Eastern Time mark.
Okay.
And for the home viewers, I just want to remind you, a few emails have already come in, but send them to info@ashevilleyoungcenter.org. That's our main email address. Send any questions there. When we come back in the break, we can maybe start with Zurich, do live questions in their room, then Asheville, and then we'll do email questions. Does that sound okay, Murray?
Sounds good.
Good. So 15 minutes, we'll reconvene.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, the last email question. We've got some email questions, but I thought first, why don't we ask if Zurich participants have questions. I know there's one or two here in Asheville. And I guess, Murray, before we do that, do we need to leave time for any further presentation, or are we doing full questions from this point forward?
Well, I thought I'd start out by saying a few more words about Jung and Wilhelm, and one of the reasons that Jung was so interested in this ancient culture, because the Chinese weren't, as you heard Sarah Lu saying, the Chinese basically cut themselves off from their own cultural roots, beginning in 1911 with the revolution, and then even more dramatically when the communists came into power in 1949. Chiang Kai-shek went with Chinese treasures to Taiwan, set up a beautiful museum in Taiwan. But when Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, I mean, the basic idea was to destroy the old culture. I mean, really root and branch, take it down completely. So the 20th century, first 3/4 of the 20th century were dedicated to reforming, revolutionizing China and making it into a modern state. Now, where did Mao get his ideas from? Basically, a Western philosopher, Karl Marx. It was part of modernization. And you could say the China you have today, if you go there and visit this new Shanghai, new Beijing, new Guangzhou, all new buildings, extremely modern, would not be possible without these revolutions and without Mao. I mean, they laid the groundwork for the new China. Now, what becomes of new China, who knows? A new counter movement is setting in, however, and that is, at least maybe very small, but I think it will gather strength, is an attempt on the part of some Chinese intellectuals, at least, to recover something of the ancient Chinese heritage. But how do you bring back the old, the mythological, the hoary past into a modern society, a modern way of thinking, scientific, business-oriented, capitalistic, even though not officially, society that China is today? How can you possibly bring it back? Now, that problem is the same problem that Jung was facing in modern Europe. In Europe, this started with the Enlightenment, started with the Protestant Revolution, Protestant Reformation actually, and moved on into the Enlightenment until in Notre Dame Cathedral under Napoleon, the goddess was removed and reason was crowned supreme. And the values of the Enlightenment, rationality, clarity, basically the masculine mind took over and severed itself as much as possible from traditional values, religious values, mythological thinking, symbolic thinking, all of that in favor of the masculine mind, which is analytic, which is scientific, which is oriented toward practicalities, how people, making a comfortable life for people, materialism, consumerism, all of that we get along with the Enlightenment, but we lose cultural depth and we lose the sense of the symbolic, the religious, so on. This was the problem that Jung faced from the time he became conscious. He saw his father suffering from and destroyed by the conflict between science and religion, couldn't find a way out. And Jung undertook to solve this problem in another way by basically translating or converting, as Sarah pointed out with The Secret of the Golden Flower, translating ancient concepts stated in their mythological and religious form into a psychological language. This is represented in the Red Book by a scene where a figure named Izdubar appears. The great bull man from the east appears to Jung in the high mountains, and they have a dialogue. And Jung tells Izdubar about science in the West, and Izdubar tells Jung something about the mythological way of thinking, shows it to him in the East. And in this confrontation between the two of them, you see the dialogue between science and mythological religious forms of thinking coming to a head. And Izdubar is crushed by the confrontation. He says, what you tell me, what you have is poison. It's poisonous. It's killing me. It's stronger than the armies of Ishtar. And he's a figure from, represents Eastern mythological thinking. And Jung says, well, you're wounded now, but maybe we can find some help in the East. Can we go to the East and find help there to heal you again? He says, don't dare go to the East. You will be blinded by the sun in the East. It's dangerous for the Western person to go to the East. You'll be destroyed, like I'm destroyed in the West. So there you have it. So what did Jung do? He tells Izdubar, look, I think I've found an answer. We'll say that you're not real at all. You are a figment of imagination. You are an image. You are a symbol. You are a fantasy. We'll say you are a fantasy, and that will make you light as a feather, and I can take you to my home, and there I will heal you. I'll bring you back to life, but as a fantasy. Now what's he doing? He then puts Izdubar inside an egg, carries him home, takes him home, smuggles him into the Western psyche as an egg, as a fantasy, and there he incubates him. Now here you get the maternal mind again. Jung incubating something that has been destroyed and bringing it into a new form. And then out of this egg hatches the sun god Izdubar, and he goes up in the sky as a solar deity. What Jung has done is translate mythological way of thinking into a psychological way of thinking. The problem of modernity fundamentally is that people are cut off from the archetypal roots of the psyche. And those archetypal roots were the source of the ancient cultures. They were expressed in mythological and religious forms, but religions and mythologies connect you to the archetypes. And if you destroy that, you cut yourself off from those roots, fine, you get rationality, you get consumerism, you get a good life, but your ego is cut off from its source. So you saw in The Secret of the Golden Flower, what do? You have to go back, you have to go down, you have to go back to the source, back into the womb. That's backward, the circulating back, and that's what Jung found so interesting about this text, because that's exactly what he had to do in the Red Book. He leaves the spirit of these times, that's the flat world of rationality, and he follows the spirit of the depths, and that's back down into the cave where you were born, back into the womb, down, 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 until he comes across the figures of the collective unconscious, and interacts with them, dialogues with them, and finds a way to bring them back into modern life in a way that's acceptable to modernity, that more or less acceptable to modernity. And that is depth psychology. So depth psychology offers a way of retrieving the ancient mythological and religious contents and connecting modern man again to the depths of the psyche. That's Jung's genius. That's his contribution. And he saw Wilhelm bringing him to the West in a version that he could digest and he could work with the contents that he needed to transform Western thinking and Western mentality into something more whole, something less one-sided, not just left brain, but left-right brain, not just analytic, masculine thinking, but also the maternal mind, the feminine mind. Bring them both into being in a new form in modernity. Now, he says in his address to the memorial to Richard Wilhelm something very interesting. He uses a word that he also uses in a letter to Richard Wilhelm when he invites him to give a talk to the psychotherapists at Bad Nauheim in 1930. He says to Wilhelm in that letter, "I want you to come because I feel that what you bring us with your treasures from China will inoculate," he uses the word inoculate, will inoculate the Western mind against a disease, against an infection. He uses the word inoculation. Now, he uses that word again in this memorial address, where he says, this is paragraph 78 of volume 15, he says, Richard Wilhelm has bequeathed to us a task whose magnitude we can only surmise at present, but cannot fully apprehend. Something huge he's brought us, a task. Anyone who, like myself, has had the rare good fortune to experience, in association with Wilhelm, the divinatory power of the I Ching cannot remain ignorant of the fact that here we have an Archimedean point from which our Western attitude of mind could be lifted off its foundations. And that's what he's looking for, something to treat this Western attitude of mind to something, a fundamental remedy. It is no small service to have given us, as Wilhelm did, such a comprehensive and richly endowed picture of a foreign culture. What is even more important is that he has inoculated us. He has inoculated us with the living germ of the Chinese spirit, capable of working a fundamental change in our view of the world. Now, I find this word inoculation very interesting. You could say that by bringing the I Ching into the West, the way Wilhelm did, he was giving, he was adding to our worldview, scientific worldview, the concept of synchronicity, which Jung mentions for the first time in this address, by the way. The word synchronicity comes up. It is an account of reality that does not see causal links. You know, this causes that without meaning. You have a chain of events. This causes this, that causes that. So in science, you trace causality back. What is the cause of your illness? Find the cause, treat the cause. So this sense of causality, the world came into being from the Big Bang. There was a causal chain of events that has produced the planetary system and so on and so forth. What the I Ching brings is a different view of how events come into being, how things happen. And that is synchronistic. You have a coincidence of events. You have a problem, you ask the I Ching for an oracle, it gives you some images, you consult those, and then you think in a new way and maybe take some actions on the basis of that. But basically the linkage between one event and another event is very loose. It doesn't have this chain of causality that Western science focuses on so intensely. So you take a historical event, Chinese Revolution 1911, and you say that was caused by this chain of events that preceded it. You know, this happened to this one, that happened to that one, so on and so forth, and therefore you get the revolution in 1911, or the American Revolution, rebellion against England because they tried to tax tea, and the Boston Patriots rebelled, and so on. Those are causal, rational linkages for historical events. I got married to this woman because I was introduced to her by my friend, and we hit it off and so on. That's a call. My friend introduced me and so on. What synchronicity says is it gives you another account of the meaning of that event. Yes, these things happened. They happened more or less together at the same time, but they happened for a reason that is incomprehensible to us. We don't know why. They just fell together. And most of the life-transforming events in your and my life probably have this feature to them. You meet somebody by accident, and they change your life. Somebody says something, and that leads you in another direction, and your whole life is turned around. Most of the important events in history, I believe, can't be explained sheerly by causality. There's something else going on, and that something else is a mystery. And that's what the I Ching teaches you, and that's what synchronicity says. Behind the scenes, there's something else going on. Now, back to the word inoculation. Jung felt that, as Izdubar said to him, it's dangerous to go to the East. You will be blinded. If you simply go there and leave Western mentality behind, and give yourself over to the other one. You become a Buddhist and live in a monastery in India or China or somewhere. And forget about your Western mentality. You might, transform yourself, change yourself, but chances are, if you come back to your Western culture, you'll just flip back into the old. There isn't really an integration of the two. And so it can be dangerous to be blinded by spirituality, to get too close to the archetypal. You can be overwhelmed by it. And the East offers that, okay? Or these old traditions offer it. The old religion, all the old religions offer you an access to the archetypal. But it can be very dangerous from a modern point of view. In other words, you just lose yourself in it. You get possessed by the archetype. You get burned up by getting too close to an archetypal flame. And so to be inoculated is to get just enough to get sick a little bit. You get a little bit of smallpox, but you don't get the whole thing. So that when you are exposed to the whole thing, you'll be safe. Okay? It's like what Wilhelm has brought in the I Ching is a little bit of an inoculation, so we don't just throw over the modern and go wildly back into a rampant religious enthusiasm or regress to the medieval mentality, something like that, and become mythologically minded all over again. And we'll just have to do this again and get over the mythological mind. You get a little bit of it, but you don't fall back into magical thinking. And that's the danger, that you fall back into this mystical, magical thinking. So what Jung wants to do is a very different project from becoming a fundamentalist religious person all over again. Let's just get religion. Let's go back to the mythological. It gives us meaning. It gives us direction. Gives us orientation. That's not Jung. You can do that if you want to, but Jung thinks that's not taking the evolution of the human spirit further. It's just going back. It's regression. You need a little bit of that, but then you have to take it further. And that taking it further is finding a way to stay in the ego consciousness that we have in the West and have developed over the centuries, scientific, rational, everything that we value in our modern culture, value and hold firm to, but from that position are able to encounter the depths of the collective unconscious and pick up the archetypal energies and sources, but not get devoured by them, not get possessed by them, not get blown away by them, but integrate them, bring them in. So what Jung proposes in the end, which he writes about in his essay on synchronicity, is not to replace causality with synchronicity, a new principle, but to add it. So he's got causality going on over here, and then he's got synchronicity here. And he wants to find a way to combine those two so you can talk about a world that is made up of causal sequences, obviously, but there is a mystery in it. There's another dimension to it that can not be explained by causality, that has meaning, that offers deep meaning and significance for what's happening. And this meaning is not something that we create. It's something that resides in nature itself, in the world itself. So he's looking for a kind of combination of science and religion that doesn't choose one over the other. And he felt that Wilhelm's contribution and this huge task that he sets bequeathed to us, the magnitude of which we can barely comprehend, was this project for the future, to produce a culture that is not bereft of the mystery, but is not superstitious, is not falling back into old habits of thought, mythological thinking. That's a regression. So that's the big task that he has in mind. And so he appropriates these. Jung is sometimes thought of as a traditionalist. He loved tradition for the sake of tradition. It's not true. He thought tradition had lots to offer, these ancient thought forms, but not in and of themselves. He didn't want to just go there and stay there and enjoy the beauty of the world if you look at it through the eyes of the ancient Taoist sages or something, or the monks of the Middle Ages, or the mystics, Meister Eckhart and so on. He could appreciate it, but he didn't want to go there totally, but bring what they had to offer, namely their connection to the source of life and to the mystery, into the modern world in a way that we can live it and live meaningful lives without sacrificing our intellects and you know, it wasn't an easy task to come to modern rationality. A lot of people died for it. There are martyrs to science. Look at Galileo and others who fought for what we have. It would be foolish to give it up. But it isn't enough on its own. And Jung recognized that very early on. It's one of the reasons he left Freud. He thought Freud's thinking really was too much determined by modernity. Freud was really a child of modernity and the Enlightenment, and Jung wanted to go further than that. And that's I think the main reason he had to leave the Freudian worldview and way of thinking. So again, there are many parallels between what Sarah said about the secret of the golden flower and what you can find in Jung's Red Book. The nothingness is the pleroma in the Seven Sermons to the Dead. And out of the pleroma, out of the nothingness, comes the creatura, that's differentiation, the yin-yang, first differentiations. And out of that creatura comes individual personality and so on. So there's a lot of interesting resonances. And when Jung read that text, The Secret of the Golden Flower, being still so close to the Red Book, I mean, this is 1928, he stopped writing in the Red Book. He thought, now I've found a resonance with a wider world. Ancient Chinese were doing something very similar to mine, and it's a confirmation that what I'm doing isn't just for me alone. It isn't just my own idiosyncratic, attempt to find meaning in my life and get the monkey off my back and so on, which he of course had to do, but solve my own complexes, but it rests on an archetypal foundation. This is a process that you can find universally, this process of individuation. And I'm going to bring it into a modern expression that people who live within Western culture and within modernity can benefit from. Now, what's happening in China, I don't know if they will be able to bring back the ancient treasures into what they have claimed as modernity and make it work for them, or they'll just live side by side. Jung wanted to integrate them somehow. And it's nice to have these old pieces in your library. You know, you can look at them, you can feel them. They're beautiful, antiques and so on, but they don't have any relevance to how you live your life. That's one way of retrieving the past and holding on to it. And another way is to try to bring the wisdom that resides in those texts, and there, as Sarah said, the simplicity rests on archetypal foundations. What they have to offer is something that modernity badly needs, if we can figure out a way of using it. Okay, so it's well, I think I'll stop here, and we can now take questions. And I would like to ask you to ask questions of our guests or myself, wherever you would like to address the question. Bettina is here to talk about her grandfather and her film. Sarah's here, a representative of this collision of cultures, attempting to solve the problem of modernity and ancient Chinese wisdom. And I'll try to do my part. Yes, please.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Marie. We're getting quite a few questions now coming in over the internet.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead and we'll start with Zurich, maybe do a question or two there. I know there's one or two live questions from Asheville, and then we'll start going through some of the
Zurich.
internet questions, and we'll cycle back. Anything from Zurich?
Can you direct the camera over in this direction?
That's
Judy,
okay.
Judith would like to ask a question. Just go ahead.
I'll just go ahead.
The mic is live.
Actually, it's more, I'm intrigued about something that you said, Sarah, in your talk, which was very moving and I thought very personal, which really brought it alive, so thank you. I wanted to ask you, you talked near the end of your paper about how looking at Jung's interpretation or treatment of the Chinese text and the golden flower somehow gave you a way in which was fresh for you, and you as a person from the East and from Taiwan, I wonder if you could talk more about that, because we're, you know, and just as Marie was talking about how Jung wanted to bring that into this Eastern thought and mystical way of being to inoculate the West, to bring some kind of interweaving, some kind of new way for the West. But I found it interesting that you talked about it as giving a new way for you as well. So.
And you use that word misreading, which
Yes.
I like very much.
That's what I want to say. It's in the traditional text has a very long history of establish this authorship about what is the right, what is the wrong.
Commentary,
And so I found what is the liberation of reading Jung and actually Wilhelm's translation also is because they coming in with their own understanding, and especially Jung bringing it out of almost out of the cultural context, and then bring his own understanding, and his own understanding. He said very clear in the commentary. He said, I'm a physician, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a doctor. I concern of human psyche and people's suffering. So he reads those things and then translate it psychologically. And this is religious, spiritual practice, but he take it as symbolic understanding. Symbolic reading, and then so this I found it's really a way of breakthrough, because we don't have to take it the the religious belief in order to contact those wisdom. We can walk in and with symbolic understanding. And that's, I think, it's why Jungian psychology or analytic psychology became more and more welcome in the East, because it's give it a way to try to personal understanding of those symbol and those culture with very personal understanding. The personal understanding include imagination, include the personal connection. Actually, this the like Hui in these words, and for me, in the very beginning of contact of Jung's reading, I was thinking he's wrong. Because this is not our understanding about translation, how to understand these words. And so I remember my first reaction is, oh, really, Wilhelm translated wrongly, and then Jung follows wrongly. But later on, I realized, no, it's not wrongly, it's different. And then because if I follow the right way, and then I couldn't get out of the tradition. And that, I think, is...
I think Christians and Jews and others have had the same experience reading Jung and then being able to go back to their own traditions in a much freer way. You're not trapped in the old thought forms anymore, and you can appropriate.
You're not trapped in the dogma.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he gives way. He gives a method to understand it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Is there another question from Zurich? Yeah. Okay, we've got one more here, Andrew.
I'm cheating. You've got two more because I've got a quick question for each of our presenters. I'm not going to pass up the opportunity of having Richard Wilhelm's granddaughter here without asking about the Rainmaker story, which is another gem that came from the Jung-Wilhelm encounter. And if there's anything more that you can tell us about it, I don't know if you cover it in your film. And to get my second question in very quickly, you said, if I understood you correctly, that the natural flow of libido was outwards.
Yes.
And that rather surprised me because it seemed very unidirectional for Chinese thought. And I wanted to make sure I'd understood it properly.
Yeah. Maybe I answer first because it's short. So
With me short too, so you start.
Give it a time. I want to know more too about Wilhelm. Yes, actually the natural flow is going from the source and going out and then create a world. So for human being also, the five senses are desire and eager from the attraction of outside. So that is the energy flow out. So in the end of the life, we exhaust our original energy we brought from we get born into the world. We have like storage of the original energy, and then we slowly waste it or exhaust it because the natural flow. So we will die. And then
if you reverse it, do you achieve immortality?
Yes, that's perfect. So it's really against the nature. So sitting and quiet and then eating very plain, it's really not a natural way.
Well, isn't there something about creating the diamond body in there? And that creates the diamond body that is immortal and eternal, right?
Yes.
There you are. Steve, you catch that? Immortality. Bettina, do you know some?
I'm afraid I really have to disappoint you. There's nothing more that I could add to the Rainmaker story from what I read and followed in my researches. So
Maybe nothing more needs to be added.
Well, it's.
I only saw Hermann Hesse picking it up, but there is no transition which I could follow. So did he pick it up from Jung, from Wilhelm?
Jung says that he heard it from Wilhelm. and that
So,
Wilhelm...
and Hesse definitely picks it up. So,
And Hesse picks it up.
so
Does everybody know?
is
I mean,
some-
it's
some synchronicity here.
Sabatino,
Bert,
tell
go
the
ahead and
story.
give the audience just a capsule of the Rainmaker story. There may be some that don't know that.
Mary.
Jung says that he was told this story by Richard Wilhelm, he says, and the way Jung tells it, Richard Wilhelm actually experienced this. So that's what we would need to check on. He said Richard Wilhelm told him that when I was living in Qingdao in China, there was a terrible drought, and people were doing all kinds of ceremonies to make the rain to fall, and you know, doing whatever they knew, and nothing worked. So finally, they resorted to calling in a rainmaker, a famous rainmaker from a distant province, and he came in and looked around for a little bit, and then he said to them, "Please build me a small hut on the outside of the town." So they did what he asked, and then he retreated into this hut for 3 days, and lo and behold, at the end of 3 days, it started to rain. Not only did it rain, it snowed. And Richard Wilhelm said it's very rare that it would snow in this place. Now, I don't know if it snows a lot in Qingdao, but he said it was an amazing happening. So then they asked the rainmaker, "How in the world did you manage this?" And the rainmaker said, "Well, when I came here, I looked around and I saw that things were not in order. The mind was not in order. The spirit was out of order. There was chaos, spiritual chaos in the town. So I went into my hut and I meditated for 3 days, and I put myself in order. And I knew that if I could put myself in order, it would bring the whole universe into harmony, and things would come about as they should. You need rain, it would rain, and so on and so forth." Now, this is an example of synchronicity, a synchronistic way of thinking. You meditate and it starts raining. It's not a causal connection, maybe, as far as we know. Jung was so fascinated with this story because it turns our Western way of thinking around and, you know, unhinges it in a characteristic way. And he said to Barbara Hanna, one of his followers, he said to Barbara Hanna, "Every time you lecture, Barbara Hanna, you tell the Rainmaker story. Be sure to tell that story." Jung valued it so highly. And he thought that's, you know, a method for dealing with the world that's not extroverted, it's not activist in one sense, it's activist in another sense. Put yourself in order, and harmony will appear around you. And Jung thought if enough people actually did that in their own lives, then it would have a political effect. It would have much wider cultural ramifications. Start with the individual, put the individual in order through whatever form, active imagination, meditation, Jungian analysis, whatever it takes, and then people around you will start coming into order, and the universe comes into order in the vicinity. Well, that's the Rainmaker story. And he got that from Richard Wilhelm, and he valued it very highly.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is, I love that story as well. I'm going to ask Len Cruz to ask this question. We have a question or two here. Before I do that, though, I'm going to read just a one-sentence email, only because it tells you the neat connectivity that we have here. Tom Kirsch is a friend of many of the folks out there in Zurich, and Tom writes, "Dear Sarah, Gene and I first came to Taipei in 2007. Warmly, Tom Kirsch."
2007. Tom Kirsch, the historian, speaks.
Jungians. So anyway, we have a lot more email questions. I'll ask a few in a moment. I thought that was just a delightful little touch from Tom. Len, do you want to go with your question?
I do. And first, Murray, if I could, I'd like to just comment on some of your remarks that when I think of some of the seers, Oedipus, Paul, I'd welcome being inoculated into blindness if the consequence is to see with some clarity. But the question I had for each of you, if you could answer from your own perspective, is I think of the I Ching as inherently intuitive, inherently symbolic and non-linguistic. It's imbued with all sorts of rich ideas of inner and outer, and so above as below. And then I think of how that interweaves with analytical psychology. And I would enjoy hearing from the three of you how you might recommend, in some at the risk of desecrating it, in some tangible ways, how to approach the texts. I appreciated Sarah Lou's specific remarks about the meditative practices that have historically been done. But from each of your perspectives, how might you suggest that we approach the I Ching and the Secret of the Golden Flower? Each of you, in fact,
Okay.
in turn.
You want to start, Sarah?
If we're talking about I Ching, in Chinese community, this is really one of the most difficult books to understand. If we understand from the philosophical point of view and from the real practice point of view, both are very, very difficult. And so people are actually using it in a way, it's not learning by yourself. You have to go for the real master or go through a serious learning. We don't feel like we could just approach it in a very simple way. And actually, I found quite surprised. There's so many Jungian. First, when I started to learning Jungian psychology, realized so many Jungian analysts knowing how to use it. I don't think there's that many Chinese just use it by yourself. We don't feel like we can do that. It's one of those books you put quite wholly, and it's difficult, and you have to learn from somebody else. So for me, actually, very difficult to answer that. In how to approach. If we answer in a traditional way, we would say find a good teacher, very good one, and to learn, and then learn very, very slowly. That's just something I can only say that. And myself is just
Are there
started.
good teachers in China today that you could go to?
Actually, if you understand Chinese, they put a lot of teaching video in the internet. Can learn. There's a lot of books, a lot of video tape and audio tape teaching, and you can choose from. But I think it's only in Chinese.
In Chinese,
never really translate into English. Yeah.
There's quite a bit in your film about, you have a German scholar speaking about the I Ching beautifully, and an American scholar as well. If people watch the film, they'll get a lot of information about the I Ching, about the history of the I Ching,
And of
philosophy.
using it as an oracle.
Using it, yeah.
Yeah. Even though my first encounter with the I Ching was the absolute contrary. When I was young, in hippie times in the 70s, so this was part of pop culture.
Yeah.
So it was fun to ask the I Ching. I mean, not the long and hard way with the sticks, but sort of throwing coins or sometimes even opening, sometimes even for small decisions in life. And so I came across it as some very creative enrichment. So you get stuck somewhere, you ask that book, which is much wiser than you are in the moment. And then processes come, which with a lot of help. And then later on, in preparation of that film, I met that German scholar Henrik Jäger, and he, what I think is so important, he said, well, if you use it as an oracle for yourself, the most important thing is to find the question. Mm-hmm. What do you really want to know? And as we know, the most important questions are sometimes hidden in subconscious. And because he says, well, or it is said that you will get an answer to that anyway. And if you don't find the question, you might not understand the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's can be absurd. So the process of finding a question takes a lot of time, and this specific person helps you in finding the question. Sort of you come up, and then it's sort of like molded into then that question you feel you want to ask. And then it's a different thing. Then it is, of course, it is an interpretation, which is not just abstract, but sort of for you, for this question, it is personal. There's a lot of wisdom, and then comes a point where your creativity comes in again. You have these images you sometimes don't fully understand. You have descriptions of situations you astonishingly well understand very often. You think, how come this situation describes what I have asked? I mean, but with these images, between you and these images, a creative process is going on. And this takes you to some really new inspiration, how to get on with your life and maybe, get out of your problems or stay calm when nothing works and really feel freedom by staying calm. It's very interesting. So this was a development from me, sort of from pop culture to more serious use.
And the other scholar in your films?
Professor Richard Smith.
Richard Smith.
He really knows a lot. I mean, he just published a new book, Jung, a biography. It is wonderful. He really deeply understands the philosophy, but also in a way that he connects it with life. I mean, this is also what Richard Wilhelm says. I mean, it is important to connect everything you learn with life, otherwise it's just not worth so much. And he does that. And so he did all this historic researches, so he knows about the images, but he explains it very well also to a Westerner, because he also really got deeply into these images. I mean, that's fantastic. And we haven't seen the film yet, but how he can explain these complex things, it's wonderful.
It is wonderful, yeah. He's very, very good expositor of, so Len, you watch the film and Richard Smith will answer your questions better than probably we can. But I would also want to add that in the film, Bettina shows Richard Wilhelm's grave in Germany. Do you want to describe his grave? It's so moving.
Yes, it is. It is very unchristian in a very Protestant Christian area, and on that graveyard. I mean, his eldest son, who became architect, he designed it. So it's not like a cross and a plate. It's sort of it's a ball like the earth, and that's on a stone, and a round stone plate. And this plate has the 8 trigrams of the I Ching on them. So the 8 trigrams, the basic, the connection to nature and flow of life, sort of in the order, starting with the thunder, coming to the wind and the fire and the earth and the lake and the heaven and the water, and ending and beginning with the mountain. Was it right? It is this cycle of life and in every form, and that's on his grave. That's beautiful. Yeah.
My experience with the I Ching, I can't say that I've used it a lot in my work or in my life, but occasionally and almost invariably with great meaning. I think what Bettina said is very important, to find the question, to find the right question, to take time finding the question. We have a teacher at ISAP, Krista Robinson, who spent, 20 years working with Rudolf Ritzema on another translation of the I Ching from Chinese into English. that has been published. And she works, she teaches at ISAP, she teaches courses on the I Ching and works with individuals who want to consult the I Ching. I think it's good to work with somebody, especially in developing the question, to talk about it for a while until you find exactly, what it is that you are trying to address. What is the issue, the basic issue, and to make it quite concrete, but also deep, so that you've taken the time to lift out of the background of your mind what it is that's troubling you, or what it is that you want to ask. And Krista spends maybe an hour with a person. Now, I worked with her in a group at ISAP, and we were trying to decide on a course of action with regard to our future and so on. So we took a couple of hours in one of our meetings, and she led us through a consultation with the I Ching. And so first we spent an hour developing the question, and then she used the arrow stalks and through the I Ching, and we got the changing lines and the two hexagrams. And then we spent another 45 minutes or so looking at the answer to our question. So as much time into the question as into the answer. And I must say the answer to that question and that consultation with the I Ching stood in the midst of our deliberations and our consciousness for the next couple of years. I mean, we didn't do this regularly. We did it actually only once, but it was so accurate in guiding us that we just used it like the North Star. So many decisions that we made with regard to the question were guided by what the I Ching had suggested to us. So I can say, basis of personal testimony, that it can be very useful for not solving problems, but guiding you toward how to live with the problem or how to address it in a deeper way, and how to make relevant decisions around that question. Well, so maybe we can take some questions from you, Steve, some others.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, thank you for the I Ching discussion. I thought that was excellent. Got a number of email questions. Any other question here? Meg, did you want to ask one? What's your preference?
Okay.
Yep, one question here. Comment?
I guess this is maybe for
Speak loudly into that.
Can you hear me here? Is it working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. For Bettina and Murray, well, just that in Bettina's film, towards the end of it, you say that Richard left a part of his soul in China, and I could very much identify with that because I was in mission myself for about 3 years, partly in Mexico and partly in Guatemala. So my situation was more of a north to south experience with the indigenous of who are Mayan, they're Mayan descendants, and I could really, I really could feel, really identify so much with him, because that whole idea of going for a mission, and you get this sense of having a reverse mission at the end, because you go expecting to give, and then you become transformed and changed in that process. So the return is always a bit of a shock. You prepare to go, but no one really quite prepares you for how you need to come back and to integrate all of this in order to find meaning and to, in essence, sort of convert your homeland from
Right.
what you've learned from there, because otherwise, you can fall apart if you don't, if you don't integrate and get that and find that meaning. It's like the psyche can't handle not doing that in order to survive. And so that was my experience. I could very much identify with all of that, and I felt that he integrated and found meaning with his experience in a beautiful way. But you do feel like you leave part of your soul there.
You want to comment on that, Bettina? I think you're really onto something very important there in Richard Wilhelm's life. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, he paid a price for entering so deeply this culture. This culture which he really made his own, and he loved the time in China. And I think the best time of his life was when he went back to China the second time, when he was in Beijing, not as a missionary anymore, but as a cultural advisor to the embassy first, and then teaching at the Beida, at the University of Beijing. He had to leave. I mean, it was not that he wanted to leave, he had to leave. I mean, financial reasons, family in Germany, so he quite reluctantly left China and came back and came to Germany, where, well, the dark times of National Socialism were already forming, developing. So this was difficult, and what you were talking about in sort of inoculating or broadening the minds, nobody wanted to hear much about that. I mean, his texts at university, they just said, well, you've seen that in his film, they said, well, they're not scientific enough. And they attacked him for using too much his intuition. And then he said that very wise sentence that intuition does not contradict logic. It only goes further.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But nobody seemed to, not nobody, some of them, a small elite culture like Hesse and all his friends he had, they loved it, and I'm sure he felt home with them. But otherwise he felt estranged with the country, estranged also with Protestant religion in a way, because he set off as a Protestant missionary. And then later he quoted Nietzsche saying, God is dead, as a provocation. So provocation, but he wanted to merge the two cultures and build something new out of it.
Yeah.
Actually, he went further. He was a translator, he brought something back, and he wanted to get a step further. And I think this also connected him to Jung, to not only bring back, but with both sides create a new culture. That was his aim. And he said, to do that, you have to destroy, quite aggressive, destroy the culture which is, and come to the very roots which are alive still. Go as deep as they're alive, and from there, on both sides, west and east, and from there build that new culture which then can guide. Very daring concept, and unfortunately did not live enough to further develop that. But I think in his soul, he was so connected to China, and he felt really homesick, and somewhere he couldn't come back.
Yeah, and you do feel a sense of homelessness.
Yes.
You know, it's like the word home takes on a completely different meaning, and having to create a completely new home.
Yes. And I found this was interesting me. I mean, this is such a modern topic with all the immigrants. And so I think this is also important.
And when Jung says, Wilhelm has bequeathed to us a task whose magnitude we can only surmise at present, but cannot fully apprehend, that was it. And I think today we talk about, the global culture and what's happening on a global scale, because we're all so intimately connected now with each other, and the conflicts that arise out of this obviously are demanding a new form of culture, because these old ones in collision will just end up fighting and destroying each other. So this idea of building a new world culture, really, I think, was his project.
Yes, exactly.
And he was just at the beginning of it, of course, in 1930. He died in 1930.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. Let me shift to a couple email questions. We got some time left. The first one I'd like to read is from Jessamine Mello, who, by the way, says, see you in February at ISAPS. I'm assuming y'all might know her.
Right.
But it's a nice comment. It's kind of lengthy, but I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing, see if we have some time, then ends in a question directed, I think, for Sarah. But I'll go ahead and read through that. First, a quick commentary. Sarah, when you mentioned the importance of stopping what would normally catch our attention and disperse our psychic energy, it made me think of my own meditation practice and a similarity to what you're talking about and how important it is in my own individuation process. When through a willed act of introversion, we stop and contain the outward flow of sensation, I have found that the energy which is normally dispersed starts to intensify and expand inwardly, and that the senses then begin to work to relay or reflect like a mirror information about our inner world. People can try this if they catch themselves in the moment before you eat something you aren't hungry for, or turn on the television before you're bored. The longer we immerse our awareness in the inwardly focused sensory experience, the more that energy will burn its way through the layers of self-delusion and complexes. I have found that the energy, which was once dispersed in sensory input, becomes dispersed again in the complexes of my inner world, something as distracting as the external world of the senses. If I can remain a witness to the rising of my complexes, I can easily recognize and detach from those voices and eventually work with them. Once I pass through the land of my complexes, I can finally reach a place where the process ultimately reveals the energetic essence of our true nature, which is not only pure witnessing consciousness, but also the creative, all-pervading force of all manifestation, a revelation which literally transforms everything we experience. Now the question, just to close. And secondly, a question, I wonder about this practice and its relevance to the practice of active imagination. For me, in the process between the complexes and the nothingness or the light, there is a dimension where the archetypal figures can be engaged, and this is a route to get to that space. Any comments? That's a long one. I hope you could follow all that. It doesn't have to be Sarah answering, but any thoughts from any of you all with that?
It's a very good one.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think Taoist meditation do have very different ontology than what we know about depth psychology. One very obvious one, it's in the process of meditation, trying to really get rid of or break through of all the image coming in on the middle of the meditation in order to reach a certain level of enlightenment. And so active imagination, from my experience or my understanding, was not that against, actually welcoming the image coming from our unconscious and trying to understand dialogue. But in the Eastern spiritual practice in general, treating those images as something leads you to sideway. And so I would say the similar process go into the inner world, but somehow trying to reach different ends. That's how I experience the difference of active imagination and meditation from the East.
I think it's a very good statement. Whoever wrote it, I think sounds like it's based on their own experience. And I think the thing about active imagination is it's very individual. And so each person who practices it will probably give you a different account of what they've experienced. And for some, it's a way to this light experience, to the light, to the inner light. For others, it's maybe a long journey through a labyrinthine garden or a cave, and almost endless in its elaboration of story, narrative, and image. But I think if one continues and follows it, there will be at least moments along the way that look like meditation. There will be places of emptiness, there will be spaces, there will be moments of light, and being bathed in the light, or being united with the light, being transformed by the light. And if you look at Jung's Red Book, you see all this variety of experience, but there definitely is the experience of the center, which he puts in the center of the mandala, and there's a light there. He says in his autobiography that he had a dream toward the end, I think it's 1928, just about the same time he received this package from Richard Wilhelm, where he was in Liverpool and it was dark at night, and he went to a crossroads, and there was a circle, and there was a tree in the center of a fountain, and the tree was full of light. It emanated light. It wasn't being enlightened from above, but it emanated light from within itself. And he said this was his final answer. This is the self. It is the source of light. And the source of enlightenment, the source of life. He found his way to the center. And so I think if you track it, there are points of contact in parallel. Maybe the way is different. Certainly in the traditional meditation practices, it's prescribed. This is how you do it. Here's step 1, 2, 3, 4. Active imagination is much freer and more spontaneous. But in the end, maybe they arrive at a very similar place. I mean, that's my conviction, at least, that they're all searching for this center of being, and the need to contact that is to contact the source of life. And sometimes in the Red Book it's spoken of as a star, the star that orients you and guides you. It's a source of light. Phanes, that appears to Jung as the god of light, so on. So I think there are differences and similarities, but I like that discussion very much. The activation of we'd say introverted sensate function, maybe if you take the libido in, activates the introverted sensate function, and you begin experiencing this activation of the complexes and the inner world, and something along those lines.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've got a question for Bettina, and it's a film editing question, but I have a nice compact one. This is from Patricia O'Neill Fleming, and she asks, I would like to say to Bettina that I greatly appreciate her decision to end the film with the grandfather's own words of, "What is time?" It speaks highly of her understanding of him and his work. I wonder if she would be interested in commenting on how she arrived at that editing decision. It is a very powerful ending. Thank you, it says.
Thank you. This ending was wonderfully edited, but it was scripted. It is in the film. There's a description of Richard Wilhelm being in a Buddhist cave, in one of the many Buddhist caves, Jung caves, in, close to Datong near the Mongolian border. And there he had sort of a really strange, close to metaphysical experience. So he sat there, it was dark, he was tired, and then the statue started like speaking to him. Not speaking, that's wrong. There were lights and sounds. It was like a choral, sort of with higher tones from the smaller statues and deeper chords from the bigger statues. And that description is in the very beginning of film. And in the end, the situation is taken. It takes it further that then he saw himself. It was like in a dream of eternity, and the changes. I mean, which is the theme of that film, of course, of eternity, and then also the relativity of time. So this ends with, what does time mean? Or was sind da Zeiten in German? And of course, he had to have the last word. I mean, the film was about him.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've got one more email question I'd like to ask, although I want to be open to the Zurich. Zurich, we've got 5 minutes left. Is there a question there that you want to ask, or shall I go for the last internet one?
Anybody have a burning question here? Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, so we will go for the internet. This is from Peggy Diane Avakian from Fresno Pacific University. I am curious if in the return movement, I think she's talking about Sarah and some of the flow in that diagram that you put up on the slides. I'm curious if in the return movement, is there a sense of it being counterclockwise in its direction, or is it more free-flowing, returning against the flow? I'm asking this in the context of movement and dance therapy. Thank you for a beautiful presentation, 2 exclamation marks. So, any thoughts on that, Sarah?
Yes, the direction it is a counterclock. Yes, imagine when we breathing, and the breeze. We imagine the breeze. It's a counterclock as goes through the spine up to the head. So it's not like the air going from the nose and going to the lung. That is opposite. That this kind of circulation is just correlate with the concept of return or against the natural flow. So in order to bring up the life back, not regression, but it's go back to the higher awareness, higher spiritual development. And so really, it's not free flow. Definitely, it's free flow. Actually, is quite dangerous. The meditation from the very beginning, the Hui Ming Jing, the book of the Chinese life, the Chinese book of life, in the very beginning was describing not to exhaust any more energy. It's not necessary. We have to aware how to keep ourselves is as a sealed container, and then from there we start to bring up the heat to burning this spirit, and the heat is the breathing. And this breathing is inner breathing. It's not external breathing. It's inner breathing. So the circulation is like a fire, small fire, burning under the knees, and so that the spiritual life can start to grow, and then the baby, the embryo comes. Yes. So that is very important. So we have countless of this kind of mystical stories and dramas talking about somebody was doing this meditation, and suddenly there's something comes in and interrupt this process, and the person will fall into dangerous situation or hell, actually.
Into hell.
Yeah, yeah. It's
fire.
You can go into any animal run or ghost run. It's very dangerous, actually. From the cultural history is talking about this kind of work actually should be protected, and protected by maybe the environment, the temple, or like I think Jung really catches. He said the mandala, the concept of mandala is really just a circle, And what is the circle means is when we draw a circle, then set a line, and there is a boundary. And when you walk in, that is a holy space. And the holy space actually is really our body. And then so what happening inside, it's a very, very spiritual practice. And for us, sitting there doing Taoist breathing exercise is creating this alchemical content. Also is holy exercise.
Now, was the Secret of the Golden Flower Chinese alchemy?
Yeah.
Which it's an alchemical. They use alchemical language.
Yes.
And so on.
Yes.
And that put Jung onto alchemy. That's when he started studying
exactly.
alchemy. That's why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this, what caught his eye was this transformation process, this inner transformation process in alchemy. And then he spent the next 20, 30 years studying mostly Western alchemy, but that really was the tipping point.
Yes.
Well, thank you again. We're at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 p.m. in Zurich time, I suspect. Boy, we thoroughly enjoyed it here. Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. We really appreciated the breadth and depth of that. We really had neat perspectives from all three of you that really blended, I think, together beautifully. So thank you again, and we'll talk more in a couple months. So
Thank you, Steve.